Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this subcommittee meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for zoning regulations review. For commission members, I have Ryan Canoyer, Alvin Hill, Jane Salsey, Ray Williams, John B. Lanky, Mike Krogel present, and for staff, Kira Pengesic and Cindy Dunn, and members of the public as well. So let's take it away.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay. So since I do not yet see Russ, and as we know, he specifically asked us to wait until the last meeting to talk about dark skies. Let's just start at the top in case he's running late. It seems fair, and there's not really that much else to talk about anyway, but it would start us with what came up last week in terms of a potential addition of a definition for junkyard. And Cindy had said she was going to do some background there. So I'll let Cindy start off and then we can go from there.
Okay, I got my audio on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so did everybody read the paper that was sent to you today? Do you have that to show?
I can. I have to go away from this one. Bear with me. Stop share. Go ahead and say whatever it is you have to say while I pull it up, Cindy.
Okay, so we had our meeting Monday with Meg and Tara and I, and this came up, and I had looked at it after everybody said last week that I thought this was a good idea, and I'm going, I don't know where I was when that was originally put on my desk. I don't know where my head was. So anyways, I did go, so Meg said, well, the statutes refer to junkyard. So I put the word junkyard into the General Assembly page for information. And the bottom, the simple explanation of this, the junkyard is intertwined with the word recycling. And their emphasis in most of the legislation, there was like 126 hits for the word junkyard. Most of the legislation had to do with motor vehicles recycling, licensing to be a recycler, illegal acts, people who are doing it without license. A couple of them were about, coordinating with blight ordinances. And I didn't read them all, obviously. And so my take on is that Putnam does not allow new recycling facilities. And what we have that one that is probably going to be another couple of years before it's actually up and running with all the legal licenses they need. And of course, we have Bob Marion's on Route 12, and that one is grandfathered, but I understand his property in Buckley Hill Road, which you can't see, is full of junk. And then Azard Road, we all know about that one. That's slowly being cleaned up, but not fast enough for me. And there's plenty other places around town that their yard just has junk in it, and that has to do with blight. So I guess my question is what is the intention of us wanting this in the regulation? Is this something that is needed? The ordinance takes care of any vehicles over 2, unregistered vehicles over 2. Was very, very fortunate, got rid of, was on Aquatic Road, very cooperative, got rid of a whole bunch of vehicles on that one. And it's a slow process. It was very slow process on Riverside Drive. So what is your purpose of it? Is there a reason to put the definition of junk yard in our regulations. And how are they going to be referenced? So I'm asking all of you that question.
Can I speak there, Mr. Chair?
Of course.
To your reference, Cynthia, the industry has changed. That's why they use the word recycling and salvage yards and everything to get away from the word junkyard, because the junkyard back in the day, and I say back in the day, people used to bring their cars or whatever they didn't want, and that's where it went, and that guy took care of it. Then when the industry started to change, we call it the industry now, the recycling industry, they came up with different formulas, recycling, and Linda's was one of Linda's, Standard Auto up in Worcester, quite a few others in Connecticut, everything. They all started changing it so they could get away from the word junkyard. Like, it was like it would take anything and everything, lawn chairs, you name it. People that didn't want to take it to the dump. I shouldn't even use the word dump. It's transfer stations where they get to recycle all that stuff, and they take it in. So that's why it changed. But if we're going to use the word junkyard, we need to keep the word S off of it. And if somebody is piling it up in their yard and they don't have any of the permits, by the state or or the town to do this, and they're just taking it and stockpiling it, then the only alternative would be is that to create a blight ordinance. But if you create a blight ordinance, you can check what I think the town of Milford, all them towns along the Gulf Coast that have that blight, and it's nothing but a thorn. If we can keep it in the regs and we can control it with fines and stuff, that if they don't have the proper paperwork or whatever, then we should have the right to, but we need the lawyer in on this, how to correctly put the words in, so it we don't get caught behind an 8-ball on it. That's my take.
Okay,
Do
I
I like
see.
the idea of driving all over? There are a few, you said it, there's a few places in Thompson, yes, but some people don't care. But there's some people that do care, and they'll put up a fence. If it's an 8-foot fence, if they can put up a net, they'll put it up. It's out of sight, out of mind. There's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, I see Alvin, then Jane, then Ray with their hands up.
Just before Alvin, before you begin, I do want to point out that Brian Santos has entered the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to address this junkyard. Back in January of 2010, the town adopted a pretty extensive ordinance, Chapter 251, Vehicles Abandoned and Junked. So it's pretty well covered in our ordinances.
Thank you, Alvin. Jane?
Yes, thank you for that, Alvin. Yeah, my thoughts on this, I don't ever want to see a blight ordinance come in here. So if we change the name of junkyard, that would take care of that, correct?
Would take care of what?
Of somebody that wants to run a junkyard. Well, and there I go, calling it a junkyard. Whether it is a dismantling spot or whatever we come up with, because I don't want it to affect the private individual that is not actually running a dismantling yard. Recycling, okay, that's good. Yep, recycling. Because it just should pertain to somebody that is going to be doing it as a business.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, Jane. And I will say that I interpret this suggested definition as referring only to a business use.
Yes, yes.
And I think we touched on it a little bit last week. and whether you call it a junkyard or a salvage yard or a recycling yard, we're talking about a business use, which is not currently described anywhere in your regulations as an allowable use. Therefore, it is de facto not allowed. And also part of the reason why the definition was taken out in the first place. What Cindy and I discussed today, and where I think we landed, but obviously I still want to hear from everybody else who's got their hand up or has an opinion. Where we landed is partly because this is such a late entry for consideration. The only realistic way that we can include it in this year's updates is if what this commission wants is to, across the board, prohibit those businesses, because then we can add the definition and in each of the tables of uses specifically call out, as we do with one or two other limited uses, that it is prohibited. If there is any indication from this commission that you want it to be an allowable use going forward, I have not looked into what those proper standards are. And our goal, since we started talking about the moratorium and since we found out about the town meeting to discuss the ordinance changes, has been to get this done by February. But I do take your point, and I agree, Jane, that we are talking about businesses, not about private behavior here. So we can, if in the context of this, differentiate between junkyards and junkie yards. For the
Yeah,
purposes of conversation.
exactly. So that it is just pertaining to a business.
Yeah. Ray, I see you next.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going with, because, somebody that's got some building material in their yard is not considered, wouldn't be a junkyard. And, there's a lot of stuff squished into the definition above this, what you had on there last week. And there's a lot of stuff in there that wouldn't be considered in a junkyard, and it's kind of squishing a lot of stuff in. And for what we have for people, that's going to try starting this, I think we ought to put off and look into this a little more and worry about it next year.
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna seek clarification on the question, right? As I understood it, we were responding to a suggestion that junkyard be entered into our definitions, where, as it stands, junkyard is not anywhere else in our regulations. I don't see any reason to include the definition at this point, and I would agree with sort of what's been said, that if we want to change that in some way, that would be a better conversation for the next round.
I agree with you 100%, Joe.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah,
I
I do.
agree with
I
that.
do. Yeah, I do too. So that we make sure we get it right. So we are not revisiting this a year and a half down the road.
Yeah, for
Cindy?
what it's worth, I agree too. I
Yes.
think we can.
Unanimously.
Kara, can you go back to
To
the
yours.
beginning? Yeah, to the beginning of this, the definition.
Oh, to the one you sent or to the one in the?
Yeah, the one that's on the screen now. Yeah, right. Yeah, the definition.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you notice, I took out the last sentence on that junkyard definition. The outdoor storage on a lot of 2 or more wrecked or unregistered vehicles or vehicles otherwise not in condition for legal use on public highways. I took that out because that is covered in the ordinance. So you don't need to put that into this definition. But, I like your suggestion of putting this off and putting some more thought into it for next time.
Okay, Mike, you're next. You're still on mute, Mike, if you're trying to talk. Whoops. Crumbs. Mike, you are still on mute. Knowing you as we do, I can imagine what your input is going to be, and I'm happy to come back to it if you find your mute function. What I am hearing from this commission in this discussion is a lot of consensus around, at the very least, punting this into another round, if we take it up at all, which, again, Cindy and I discussed this afternoon, and unless what you want to do is ban them entirely, I'm totally down with that. So, Brian, go ahead while we're waiting for Mike to find his mute function.
Yeah, I apologize. Obviously I was late to this, but I didn't know if we were trying to come up with a definition for recycling business. So I posted it to the chat. We don't have to further talk about it. We can just, table it like you guys are suggesting, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw that in the chat. That's all.
I did see it, Brian. Thank you. Broad consensus.
I like your term, Brian, recycling businesses. That it clarifies it a little bit better. It says what it is, but it's also a business, not an individual, not a private home. Yep, I like that.
When I was just looking stuff up here, the general statute, that 22A207 is pretty specific too. So I think that's a good guideline to follow.
So if and when we take the topic up in the next annual update round, that's something we should consider, is starting not with a term so open-ended perhaps as junkyard, but with that very business specific use, and then deciding in what way you might want to incorporate it into your tables of uses.
Hey.
Sounds good.
Mike found his mute function. What do you have to say, Mike?
Thank God for kids. Yeah, I think we should wait till next time on this, but what I was going to say originally was I didn't even have screenshots yet, but I now have those also. So I have nothing to say except let's punt it down the road to next time.
Okay, very good. Cindy, your hand went back up.
Yes, I just wanted to mention a couple of times I have actually sent letters to people that have had junk in their yards and said that it appears that you have a recycling business going on. And I actually was successful with I think 2 of them. One was on Thompson Hill Road 200. He had 2 storage trailers. He did get rid of one, and he did have a lot of junk in his yard. And somebody had called and complained to me, and he did get rid of the junk in the yard. So it kind of worked, guys. It was, like the back door into that kind of violation, but with that guy, it worked.
So from your perspective, just to continue down the train of thought, when we take this up again, it therefore seems like it would be useful for you to have that specific definition, or whatever other term we decide on, with whatever allowances or prohibitions in the tables of uses in support of when you get those complaints.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. For the moment, I am going to delete this from this draft because we don't need it anymore. Why is that acting like that? There we go. Bloop. And there she goes. Okay. Scroll down to the next one. I still have not seen Russ come in. There's only 1 or 2 other quickies here. This is another one that came up just this week. It's why I resent the draft to you today. In our monthly staff meeting, Margaret and Cindy and I discussed some occasional informational disconnects with gravel renewals. Oh, here comes Randy. So for the minutes, Randy enters at 7:19. And Meg brings a lot of prior experience from other towns, and her observation was that in the towns where she has previously worked, when a gravel renewal comes up for a permit, there is a requirement that they provide a new as-built plan every time. Cindy had said, we do already have requirements for those gravel renewals. That is this number 2, the text in black. But in that conversation, we identified a specific instance where there was additional work outside the scope of the original approved plan, and that was a place where an as-built would be specifically useful. Cindy was very concerned, as I think this commission has generally been, about not adding unnecessary costs to applicants or permit holders, and that she felt that these requirements were sufficient. But it seemed to me that this line that I added here in the red text on the screen would sort of fill that gap. So I'll just read the whole thing, and then Cindy, I see your hand up. So under E, renewals in earth, sand, and gravel extraction and removal. Number 2, every 12 months after the effective date of a special permit for earth removal, which, by the way, we'll have to change to match the title. Earth, sand, and gravel extraction. All right, start again. Every 12 months after the effective date of a special permit for earth, sand, and gravel extraction and/or removal, the applicant shall submit to the commission a statement regarding the progress of the operation, accompanied by a letter signed by a licensed surveyor stating the bottom elevation of the excavation, the approximate amount of material removed, the size of the disturbed area, and a certification that the grading is being done in conformance with the approved plan. So here's the new text. If the licensed surveyor finds that the activity of the prior 12-month period has not been done in conformance with the approved plan, then the applicant shall be required to provide an as-built plan showing the new scope of the activity. Failure of the applicant to provide the commission with such information within 30 days after the end of the 12-month period shall be deemed sufficient cause for the ZEO to recommend to the commission to revoke the special permit upon notice and opportunity to be heard. So go ahead, Cindy.
No, I didn't have my hand up. I didn't take it down from my last conversation.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. Any thoughts from the commission?
I think that's pretty clear with that in red sentence. It states it very clearly to them, and that's what we want.
Did we just lose you, Jane?
I don't think so. Can you hear me now?
I was able to hear her, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I lost you for a second, but it might be on my end.
Okay, all right. Did you hear what I said, though?
I think only half of it.
Okay, because I like the sentence makes it very clear. It's the onus is on them to prove that they are doing what they said they were going to do.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Brian.
and then if I could go after Ryan.
I don't necessarily have any issues with the sentence. I just want to understand the process. So if the surveyor finds the activity of the prior 12-month period has not been done in conformance with the approved plan, then the applicant shall be required to provide an as-built showing the new scope of work, scope of the activity. So isn't there a fee associated to that? So if they did a larger amount of gravel removal, maybe I'm muddying the waters by introducing the fee associated to that.
Well, I don't think you're muddying the waters. I think that's one of the reasons why you would want the as-built. So if they told you they were taking X number of cubic yards out within a 12-month period, and you charge them a fee for whatever amount that they said, but they exceeded that, then they would owe new fees, and the as-built would demonstrate that.
Yeah, I was just saying that the applicant should require an as-built showing the scope of the activity inclusive of fee payment or something around that line. I just want to add something after that about the fee, just to make it clear that you're not only giving us an as-built, but there's a reconciliation period. There's a reconciliation of the fee as well.
Okay.
Maybe it's as simple as that. Scope of the activity and a reconciliation of the appropriate fees.
Okay, let's try that then, including any reconciliation additional fees owed. How's that?
Thank you.
Ray, then Cindy.
Sorry, can I just jump in for a second?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Joe, I forgot you said you wanted, you are the chair, you can jump in whenever you want.
So I was gonna say, I think this does a nice job of splitting, right, these two competing interests, that I think we value, right? Preventing undue hardship on an applicant, but also protecting the town. Instead of including any reconciliation, could we maybe as well as any reconciliation?
Sure. I mean, that is a finer language point, Mr. Chairman, but.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you for that grammar correction. Thank you.
And thanks, Ray, for your patience. I appreciate you letting me jump in there.
You're the chairman. But the only thing I wanted to say something about was should there be something in there about the company moving the stuff or paying for the surveyor, to let that they're it's in their hands to pay for the surveyor to do this and not the town.
Oh, yes, that's a
Good
good
point.
point. Yeah, hold on, so let's see. All such.
I can come up with the point, it's spitting it out is what gets me.
All such reporting by the surveyor shall be undertaken at the applicant's sole cost. Is that clear enough for everyone? Does that seem clear enough?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cindy, I think you were next.
Yes, I just wanted to just point out that this wording that Tara had put in was a compromise between wanting to require all applications, renewals to have a as-built, as opposed to let's not overburden these people with all kinds of expenses. So this is like a compromise, and I really like that compromise that was brought up. So I'm happy with it.
I love it when people are happy. Anybody, anything else on this? May I assume we have consensus here?
Sounds
Yep.
good to me.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okie dokie. Okay, so here is one that I know I sent out Monday. I had 2 emails from members of the public the day after our meeting last week, of which this is one, and it came from Rainey. And I should let you know, it also followed a very long and detailed conversation that I had with Rainey about the solar development on Pompeo Road and the upcoming public hearing. He had a lot of questions about what we have and what that process is. And he did indicate to me that he was interested in having the town in some way sort of head that off for the future. He does understand, and I'll just articulate it for the sake of the meeting recording, because I know you guys understand that anything that's adopted now has no retroactive effect and would have no effect on the current proposal for Pompeo Road, but does identify, a gap that certainly, I think you could say, exists in our current solar standards. And this was my response to that, as a suggestion to you guys. So this would be under the subsection in the solar section on large scale installations, special considerations. In the, so it would be number 3, large scale solar installations on designated scenic roads. It's a very simple sentence. I do think it covers the intent. No large-scale solar installation shall be permitted on any parcel located on a town or state-designated scenic road. I see everybody's hands up. So just before we start discussing it, the other thing to remember always is no matter what we articulate in our zoning regulations, the Connecticut Siting Council has jurisdiction on anything over 1 megawatt, which is why they have the Pompeo Road thing to begin with. But my conversations with the Siting Council do indicate that they do look at, read, and consider local zoning regulations and ordinances when proposals are brought to them.
Excuse me.
Okay, Cindy, then Alvin, then Jane.
No, not me. I didn't lower my hand. Okay.
Okay, Alvin, Jane, and then Brian.
Okay, yes, your simple sentence on number 3. I would like to see a proposed large-scale solar installation.
Okay. Oh, instead of doing it this way, I'll do it this way. There we go. Okay, Jane?
Okay, the way I look at this is, say somebody has 100, 200 acres on a designated scenic road here in town. And now they want to put in a solar system. I don't believe that it should be outright banned. That is their property. And I feel that we can work something into the language, such as the visibility from the road, whatever, so that we are not literally stopping people from doing something on their own property just because it is on a designated scenic road. So if we put something in that stipulates how far back, view from the road, whatever, those are my thoughts. I don't want to restrict somebody's property use.
Okay, yep. For whatever it's worth, the rest of the solar regulations do describe whatever setbacks, but they don't have anything extra for scenic roads. So
And that's what I'm saying. We need to put something in for the scenic road so that we don't have, you know, a fight going back and forth.
Of higher standards for installations.
Yeah, that sounds good, Tara.
Okay. Okay. Brian?
I just posted my suggestion to the chat. I don't have a problem adding this, but much to your point, Tira, I want whoever's reading our regulations not to just look at them and go, oh, a large scale solar project can't be installed on a scenic road, where that's technically not correct in the Connecticut Siting Council. And I posted it in the chat. I just wanted to manage people's expectations, right? The Connecticut Siting Council has statewide jurisdiction over specific types of facilities such as energy. And I added telecommunications because they do have the right for telecommunications infrastructure. And its decision preempts a local zoning regulation. However, the council is required to consider local zoning and planning regulations during its decision-making process, but is not bound by them, like you noted. So I feel like we should add that in there as some sort of, caveat. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a wise observation, Mr. Santos.
I like it.
Ray, I see you next, I think. Jane, you don't have your hand up again, do you? You just haven't lowered it? Okay. Go ahead, Ray.
I sat in on the last couple selectmen meetings when Rainey was in there talking to Amy and the rest of the selectmen, and I agreed with her, and Jane hit the nail right on the head with that. The same way that the selectmen were thinking about it, a couple of them anyway. And I don't believe that we should tie the hands of people that have big lots, and like she said, I believe that we should just put a recommendation that it has to be so far off the road so it's not visible for the people that live on them roads. We already are tying the hands on people on scenic roads to be able to use the property. If the family wants to use it differently down the road, and I think that takes away from their property values, actually. So I agree 100% with everything that Jane said, and that's pretty much the same thing that happened at the well, I'm not going to put words in my mouth, somebody's mouth about what happened at the selectmen's meeting, but it would, if you go back to listen to the minutes, pretty much says the same thing.
Yeah, I wasn't at the meeting, Ray, but obviously I talk about stuff with the first selectman in the office, and that would be my understanding as well of their position. So yeah, I don't think you're putting any words in anybody's mouth. Or Alvin?
Yes, indeed. On scenic roads, say an applicant comes in, all these terms are going to be discussed. If somebody wants on a scenic road that has 100 acres and wants to put up a solar ground mount system prior to any designation by the people, the rest of the people on that road are going to object to him or her making that statement. Therefore, I doubt very much then that scenic road would go through or wouldn't be voted. Let's see what happens on this upcoming.
On the 16th, the siting council hearing.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm going to be speaking at that siting council, and I doubt very much that we're going to prevail. But if they do, if the majority of that council says no, we're not going to allow this invasion, that sets a precedent. Then I think anybody that wants to have a solar installation on a scenic road will have something to say about it.
Yeah, at the risk of projecting, my feeling after looking at the documents on the siting council website, seeing the responses from Connecticut Department of Agriculture, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, I feel it is highly likely that proposal is going to be approved. This is a little bit tangential. Yeah, this is a little bit tangential, but I'll circle it back around in a minute. When I was talking to Rainey, one of the things I suggested to him, he was trying to sort of get some advice on how to approach that. I said, look, if I were a member of the siting council as a person who didn't live in Thompson and live wherever I live, I have whatever expertise I have, I'm reading the application and I'm reading the feedback from the state agencies, I would approve that plan, right? Knowing nothing about the local culture or whatever. So what I said to him is, you should focus on where you might be able to convince them to modify the plan, right? There's two places on the plan that not only when I looked at it, but that at least one of the commenters from the state looked at it and said, this is awfully close to the road here, and this is awfully close to an abutter's property line here. Could there be additional screening, right? Could limits be imposed on future development? Things that, just like when you guys consider a special permit for reasonable conditions, would be fact-based and specific to the site. So now I'll circle it back around. I think it was yesterday, I had sent you guys a document that I totally coincidentally received in one of the various newsletters I get that was specifically about setting conditions for large, in this case, utility scale solar. Now, big caveat here, this was a document developed for properties out west where this
Right.
thing on Pompeo Road wouldn't even that's like a backyard installation compared to what they do out there. But if you read further in that document, it does have samples of standards specifically to scenic areas and view sheds, and putting more robust dimensional requirements in for screening, and in some cases prohibitions. So I just wanted to toss all that out there as we're discussing this. And then just one more thing about this, which is that, you know, we have said that this is going to be our last subcommittee meeting of this round, so we can get to that February date and get everything sort of in that timely fashion. This may be another instance where if you wanted it to be really well articulated, we might be better off putting off. I could certainly add what Brian just suggested with some modification, because that's specific language and it serves a good point, I think, which is to point out that the town really doesn't have jurisdiction here to set expectations. But if you want to have, to Jane's point, some stricter standards that are nonetheless not prohibitive on scenic roads, I would be more comfortable waiting until I had more time to write something up more comprehensively, but I will follow whatever direction you guys want on this. Any other thoughts, guys?
If I
I don't
may,
think that it's relevant that the Midwest example, it doesn't, I mean, that stuff is designed for large public company, you know, big scale projects that have nothing to do with our town. So I don't
Well,
really-
that's why I said there's a big caveat. The point is not that we would follow what they do word for word. The point is there are precedents for it that I could research, look into, and then scale them appropriately. And that's also why I would say I wouldn't want to just do that off the cuff in our last subcommittee meeting. I'd rather have more time, but again, I will do whatever the commission directs me to do in this case. Ray, go ahead.
I hate to keep kicking the can down the road, but I think we ought to wait and see what happens with what's going on, and then we get a feel for what that committee's feeling is about scenic roads, and then we can, you know, work on it to see about, you know, like Jane said, and, you know, for putting something further off, putting regulations in to go further off the road, and you know, out of sight, out of mind type thing.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
There's another point too, the siting council only has jurisdiction over 1 megawatt or higher. They don't
Correct.
have jurisdiction on less than that. So maybe we could put in our regs more, you know, focused on 1 and under, since that would go to a public hearing and, you know, do like it's happening on Pompeo Road, which, like, as you said, is relatively out of our control, or not out of our control, but it's not within our jurisdiction, if you will, to regulate on. So why don't we say, and then also maybe we could add in some language about farmlands and protecting that as well. That might be a good
That stuff's already all in there.
Okay.
So this is how we're updating and amending. The large scale installation stuff that we have, which for us, large scale is, you know, we lose our jurisdiction at anything that's large scale, but over 1 megawatt, and it's defined by the dimension of the proposed installation. We have very specific language about prime farmland, core forest, and designated open space. for if you want to disturb an acre of prime farmland, for example, you have to also preserve an acre. So you can never go more than 50% over that. And that was something that we discussed in the first go around on this, as a way to preserve a family farm or a farm family's right to develop without having to go to subdivision, while still preserving the valuable substructure of those soils. Doesn't mean we can't look at them further, but again, my comfort level at this point in the game is that we would then put that into the next year's review. Ray, go ahead.
Well, we only lose our jurisdiction if it's over,
1 megawatt.
right? But then that's only if it gets kind of like denied and they go almost like to an appeal to the board. So for that siting council, but if everything goes through, we would still, it would still be up to us, even if it was bigger than that. The only reason why Pompeo Road went there was because it was pretty much denied.
I don't believe that's the case, Ray. I don't think they have to come in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the town of Thompson at all once they're over 1 megawatt. We don't see a lot of applications for telecommunications towers, which is under the same sort of structure. We just get notified that something's been proposed or approved or whatever. They can bypass us entirely as soon as they're over that 1 megawatt threshold.
Because that's where they were at when they first came to us, and then they ended up going to the state on top of it. That's how we got kicked to the side. But
well, I think they probably went that route because to your point, they knew they were getting resistance from the neighborhood, so they just skipped it. They did obviously bring it in front of the commission to discuss it, but that was never a formal application.
Correct.
oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
You're correct, Tara.
Now, Pompeo Road has a barn on it, and I remember Rainey mentioning that. I mean, it's obviously not a working farm, but couldn't there be some thought that Pompeo Road could be considered a farmland because of the barn?
Prime farmland soils are determined at the soil level. In other words, by a soil survey and a soil scientist. And
Did someone do a test? Was there a soil test?
I have no idea at what point those were designated, whatever piece of that property was designated prime farmland soils. And prime farmland soils doesn't mean those are the only soils you can farm either. But they are considered a sensitive category of soil type. So if you were to go on the parcel map system and look at any large parcel, you can do an overlay for land conservation, and there's a couple of different layers you can throw on, and one of those does indicate identified prime farmland soils. That is different from soils which may or may not have been used for agriculture in the past. Just for whatever it's worth, it is an actual distinction.
I don't have the maps in front of me, but the where they're projecting they were going to have their solar panels was not on, and I'll consider the open fields that mostly are right across from Rainey's house in that area. I'll go far enough to say that I think those would qualify as prime soils, but they aren't looking at putting solar panels on that. They're putting them behind the barn where it's ledge, and then out behind the wall where where it's not even kept up forests, where they cut wood and scrub wood and whatnot, several hundred feet back from the road, right across from all the houses.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Randy. And we are getting a little tangential talking about this particular application. Obviously, it's the reason that this adjustment was proposed. But yes, to be clear, the commentary from Department of Agriculture does confirm that the installation is not proposed on prime farmland soils. So in that sense, it's already meeting that standard. Brian, go ahead.
I just, if you can, I posted something in the chat again, just to clarify the 1 megawatt thing, so you can just add it after, not bound by them. And just add that paragraph after that.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
agree
I'll
with
copy
that.
and
That should have
drop it
been
into my
clarified. So
sidebar notes.
I wrote up something quick here. I don't mind
No, that's
waiting.
fine. It's
either.
fine. I gotta monkey with it anyway.
Yeah, I don't mind waiting either till after the hearing. I'm just capturing my thoughts here now. That's all.
Is there some
Sarah?
kind of language on the Department of Ag that we missed?
Is there what, Ryan?
Is
I'm
there
sorry.
some language about the Department of Ag that you referenced? What was that part? I guess I missed that.
So
What is the?
if you go on the Siting Council's website, each public hearing has, its own little page with links to whatever relevant documents. Among those relevant documents are letters submitted by CT Deep and DOAG, which I read, it's got to be almost 2 months ago at this point, but yes, and they do affirm that prime farmland soils are not involved in this application. And again, and I don't want to beat this one to death because it sounds to me like we have consensus to punt this into next year, but Joe, I think it might be wise to take a voice poll individually just to be sure. But going back to that, to DOAG specifically, they are definitely not enthusiastic about solar installations on prime farm soils. I am a grant reader for Connecticut RC&D for their Climate Smart Ag grants. And whenever one of those proposals comes up that includes ground mount solar on working farmlands, we have to look at it very, very carefully. And it would probably not score as highly as a roof mount or, a ground mount in an identifiably not prime farm soil area. So yeah, DOAG is very salty on the idea of converting farm soils. But again, it was sort of getting tangential to the specific application, which is not really what we're talking about here. Joe, would you mind calling a voice poll to see
Absolutely.
if it's move forward this year or punt into next year?
Yeah, so we're looking to adopt language now or to table to the next review. Let me
Where's my
get in a
pen?
gallery view. I've got Mr. Canoyer first.
I guess I would not punt it. I would put it in now.
Okay.
So using now or later, you want now?
I guess so. Yeah.
Mr. Blackmer,
I'll go along with that too.
Mr. Hill,
Yeah, absolutely. Go along with it.
Ms. Salsi,
I say, let's do it tonight.
Mr. Williams,
I would like to hold off and see what happens on this scenic road.
Mr. Lenke,
Punt.
Mr. Krogel,
Later.
Mr. Santos,
Interesting. I'll punt, I guess.
and I'm a vote for later as well. So that's 5 votes for later, 4 for now. So we'll revisit it at our next review.
Awesome.
So it turned out to be a good idea, Madam Planner, to take that vote.
I will say that is not the result that I actually was expecting. To hold off until next round. Okay, oops, that is terrible typing on my part.
Can I say one thing?
Of course you can.
Okay, this whole thing with Pompeo Road and everything else, I mean, to me, it was an end run to get this into a scenic road to stop the solar panels in the first place, and I mean, it worked for them. But a lot of consideration has to go into this thing, and we just can't decide in one night's time. It just doesn't make any sense to do so. You know,
Very good.
people were afraid of what could go in there, not even realizing that the solar panels weren't even gonna be seen. Plus the fact that you can put up vegetation and everything else so that the solar panels are not seen from the road, or at least reduced visualization. So I think we really have to work on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh yes, the moratorium thing. So another piece of input from the public that I received the morning after our meeting last week was from Rick Poitras, who, I'm going to go to the sidebar, requested that we include the specific term cultivators, meaning not just micro cultivators, but any cannabis cultivators at any scale in the moratorium. Which I guess is fine. I did sort of email back and forth with him just to clarify, you know, the fact that cultivators is not anything other than micro cultivators is not described as an allowable use at all. Therefore, it is not an allowable use. I'm of mixed feelings on whether it makes sense to include the term in the scope of the moratorium. I think it could be reasonably interpreted to imply that if we have a moratorium on cultivators and micro cultivators, that there might be an opening to allow cultivators later. And I don't think, you know, at any scale, like at a manufacturing scale. And I don't think that's really the intent of the commission. But I also don't think it really hurts that much. I was just sort of gaming that out in my head. Anyway, I wanted to include it because a member of the public made the request and you guys can discuss it.
One of the first things I wanted to make sure that we're totally clarified on is that this only applies to micro cultivators. It does not apply to the overall industry, if you will.
It applies as currently written only to micro cultivators. It has no implications for the allowance of retail cannabis, which we've already had one approved permit for, just the guy didn't get the license, and no additional moratorium has been suggested for retail. Those are the only two allowable uses currently described in your regulations at all, retail or micro cultivator.
Okay.
Because those are two different animals.
Correct.
Yes. And I also wanted to make sure for the benefit of everyone else that we're clear on what we're putting a moratorium on. That's all. Because, for instance, right, it could be a store, you know, that has products that are legal or something like that. So there could be a whatever it is, events or all that stuff. It's still legal in town. The other thing that it would not apply to, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it would not apply to a lounge concept as well. If there were some kind of.
It would not apply to a lounge concept, but that is currently not an allowable use. So if you wanted, if someone wanted to propose a hospitality space, essentially related to cannabis use, that would have to either be added to the tables of uses with a set of standards, or that applicant would have to make the case under what we always call the safety valve language. I think the threshold on that would be pretty high in this case, higher than usual. But it's currently not an allowed use anyway. So going forward, if that's something the commission is interested in, it's another thing we'd have to discuss in greater depth. Brian, then Ray.
So I kind of agree with this gentleman's comment. The cultivator it pretty much comes down to square footage from what I remember reading about this.
Correct.
A cultivator is, I think it was 15,000 square feet. And then a micro
No,
was
that's-
between 2 and 10,000.
2 to 10.
Micro cultivators are between 2,500 and 10,000 square feet.
Yeah, and then anything above 15,000.
Is
Is
a
a
cultivator.
cultivator. Correct.
So I kind of tend to agree that, and I'm sure there's different licensing for both applications. I think we should actually add the word cultivator. I didn't, when I wrote this last time, I was mostly focused in on the applicant that was, I can't remember the street that the person.
Yeah, we all know which one it is. It's this one.
Right, so I was only focused on micro at the time, so I actually support adding the word cultivator and micro cultivator because they are different.
Okay. Ray, oh, did you just put your hand down, Ray?
Brian hit it right. It said exactly what I was gonna say. So there is 2 different licenses, one for the micro cultivator and one for a cultivator. And Mr. Portress sent that in, and I agree with it 100% too.
Jane?
Yeah, I pretty much said what I was gonna say because I agree with that. Again, they're two different animals. When I think of micro cultivation, I think of small. Cultivation is big, so we need to define that, just like Brian said.
Okay, and again, I'm fine with it, but just again, to be clear, it's already not allowed. So
Yeah,
you're
I
talking about a
under-
moratorium on something that you already don't allow. But I'm fine with adding it. My only concern was very, very minor, and it's like that nitpicky language thing. If you're putting a 1-year moratorium on a use, which then, after the moratorium and you create your regulations, in theory gets lifted and then the appropriate standards.
I'm
that
looking at the
implies
fact,
that cultivator might be allowed. That's all.
I'm looking at the fact that it would clarify it to the average person.
Yep, that's fine. That's fine.
That's why I would like to see it included, because I look at those as two different beings. And I'd like to see it clarified so that the person, anybody that's looking at it is going to get it. Micro cultivation and or cultivation.
Yep, that's fine. Anybody else have any input on this topic?
Yes,
Go ahead, Mike.
for the cultivator, since it's not allowed now and we put it in as a moratorium, we would still have to discuss it to allow it later on, correct? Because when
Well,
this moratorium expires,
To allow it or
Does-
not allow it, yes.
yeah, so we would have to discuss it down the road for the cultivator itself. I'm not talking about micro.
You certainly, as a commission, could choose to discuss as a part of what we will be discussing once this moratorium is in place and we start taking this up again, whether to, I mean, you already know you're going to discuss microcultivators. So yes, you could then also include in that discussion any standards you would want to apply to, or prohibitions that you might want to apply to cultivators.
'Cause I would rather not open up that book. If it's already banned, let it stay that way.
And can I answer Mike's question another way?
Please.
If we adopt this moratorium language, it takes effect for 12 months and we do not renew it, and we simply allow it to expire, at the end of those 12 months, micro cultivators would be allowed again, but larger cultivators would not. They would still be prohibited throughout town because of the existing language in the regulations.
Okay, then I'm all set for clarification.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
I see Jane and then Alvin.
Oh, yep, sorry.
Alvin?
Yes. I would prefer to have both cultivator and micro cultivator. Statute addresses both.
Okay. Brian?
I'm sorry to ask this question, T. Can you just point me in the direction where it specifically says in our regs that cultivators are not allowed?
It doesn't specifically say it. It's on that permissive model where uses not specifically described as allowed are not allowed.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So, right, and the only other option people have, and this was, something that we intentionally put in there because we can't anticipate all uses, is what we've always called the safety valve language in the table of uses. If you want to come in as an applicant, you've got a use that is not described in the regulations and has no real analog within the regulations. You can come in, pull a special permit, and make your case to this commission that it is within the scope of or the intent of the given district that you should be allowed to do it. And you guys have very wide discretion at that point to approve or disapprove. I would say that the threshold on that safety valve language should be fairly high, and that it should have no relationship to anything already described in your regulations. So if we have, to the specific point in hand, micro cultivators as a described use, and somebody wants to come in and propose a cultivator, and this commission has not chosen to include cultivator as an allowed use, I would say, because you've described the level at which you approve of cannabis cultivation in the town of Thompson, it would be a very high threshold of proof to say that that should be an allowable use on a special permit. However, what that safety valve language allows you to do is, if you do approve, if somebody makes the case successfully and you say, you know what, that's a really good idea, we didn't think about that, you've fulfilled all of our questions, you have the ability going forward to add it as an allowable use. But as currently construed in your regulations, the only kind of cannabis cultivation permitted is a microcultivator.
Just give me 1 second. I'm trying to write something up here.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey, Brian, while you're doing that too, I mean, do we need along the lines of allowable use? So do we need to specify any other allowable uses? Like, since we're putting this moratorium on micro cultivators, fine. Do we need to specify that, dispensaries are still able to apply, or do we need to write more in terms of what is allowable uses, or no?
So the temporary moratorium is very clearly only on cannabis microcultivators.
Right.
So a dispensary, in my mind, is a retail operation that is covered under the allowable use as a retail operation under a special permit. This moratorium does not touch that.
All right.
And
And just
make it touch that?
If you can convince your fellow commissioners of it, Mike, but I think you'd have a hard time doing that.
No, it's just something we don't need in town. Again, only because there's no regulations to prove when not. I don't want to use the word intoxicated, but intoxicated by the product.
So are you also therefore in favor of not allowing liquor stores?
Don't go down that road with me, dear.
I'm just saying,
I
mean,
know,
they are
but
comparable products in the eyes
there are
of the law.
regulations, but there are regulations that tell you when you are intoxicated behind the wheel. There is nothing for marijuana at this point. That's where my problem is. There's no guidelines for it. And that's a state level thing.
Well, if you would
That's
like to
all.
make the case to your fellow commissioners that you should have a blanket moratorium, you're welcome to make it, Mike, and the commission is welcome to discuss it. My feeling is that that would not be the majority sentiment.
Well, I will make the motion that we ban them for the time being.
You can't make
until
a
we
motion in
understand.
subcommittee, it's just conversation.
That's right. Well, I will be making that motion down the road then. Only until we can get more information and understanding of the subject matter. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, so instead of adding cultivators and micro cultivators, I think I just posted to the chat. I think we should just put what I wrote in there somewhere in this document under, maybe it's under scope of moratorium. It's the first sentence with a subpart to it or something, just to say cultivators are neither an approved nor explicitly recognized use within the town of Thompson's regulations. This means that the establishment or operation of cannabis cultivators is not currently permitted or addressed under the town's existing zoning framework. Just to provide that clarity on cultivators.
I can probably do something with that.
I just don't know where it would fit in, so.
Well, I'd have to think about it, but I could probably do something with that if that's the way you and your colleagues want to go.
Sure, that's what I suggest we do instead of adding this cultivator word everywhere.
Joe?
Yeah, to me, again, like similar to what we just did with that as-built language, right? I think that is an elegant compromise, right?
To include the term.
Yes, but to not include it as part of the moratorium because it is not logical to enforce a moratorium on something that isn't permitted. I think Brian, that's a good solution. My 2 cents.
Okay, I'm formulating in my head how I think I might do that. I think I have an idea, but I'll have to monkey around with it on paper, but I will include it in a part of the final draft. Ray, go ahead.
Couldn't we just, after the micro cultivator, just put or cultivator or and cultivator?
That is the base suggestion, yes. And that's where we started.
Well, if we just put that, just put them 2 words in them 2 spots or 3 spots, would be all set.
Well, it's
Yeah,
just that it's just to the point of if we do that, it makes it sound like that we had originally allowed it, which is to my point. I'm clarifying that it's already not allowed.
I think I can work with that.
But the micro cultivator is allowed. So we're just putting a moratorium, we're putting a moratorium on that because the micro cultivator is already allowed in our regulations.
And yeah, exactly right. And I think that's exactly my point, like my reason for liking this language, because currently micro cultivators are allowed. That's what the moratorium in my mind applies to. Cultivators are not currently allowed in town, so there's no reason to put a moratorium on something that isn't allowed.
Yeah, I think if I were to include this language that Brian has suggested, it would be something like number, well, this is supposed to be number 5. Oh, no, that's supposed to be number 6. Action. Okay, so it would be like number 7, and so it would be outside the framework of the moratorium itself from soup to nuts, scope, duration, authority, scope, duration, action during moratorium, effective date. It would almost be like a footnote, but as number 7, drawing the distinction between cultivators and micro cultivators, but it's not really within the scope of the moratorium because there's nothing to apply it to in the case of a cultivator because it's not an allowable use. I think I can do it. And in the final draft, we'll receive comment, and then if I need to adjust after the comment period closes, we have a little leeway to do that. But we'll talk about that at the very end of the meeting. So it's just about 8:15. So it's 8:14. What I think I hear is that we want to include reference to cultivators in some way. The two options are to include it within the scope of the moratorium or to include it as effectively a footnote on the moratorium. So I'm going to ask again, just for the clarity, so we know exactly where everybody's heads are, a voice poll of which way you would like it, within the moratorium or attached to the moratorium. I think that's the best way to get it to the intent of the commission.
Yep, absolutely. So again, I'm just going the same way in my gallery. So Ryan, you're up again as part of the scope or as a footnote.
I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're voting on here. So as a footnote, then it's still going to be the same outcome. It's just going to be in a different place.
Correct. It's articulated slightly differently.
So like de-emphasized or I mean, in what?
So there's no implication if it's outside the scope of the moratorium that once the moratorium is lifted, that it would be an allowable use.
Right. Okay.
Wait, could you repeat what you just said on that, Tira? Please?
Maybe.
I'm sorry.
So, and this goes back to my original, like why I was a little wishy-washy on whether we should include it or not. If you're including in the scope of your moratorium a reference to cultivators, there is some implication that when the moratorium is lifted,
Okay,
cultivator may be an allowable use.
Yeah, I've
But
got
if
you,
you
but it's
put it-
already, yeah, it's not, it is not allowed, so. yeah,
Right, so
I've
it's
got you.
just,
Thank you.
right, it's just drawing a distinction between a microcultivator and a cultivator outside the actual structure of the moratorium.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Can I interject one last piece of reality before we do this?
sure.
So let's say that someone wants to do a cultivator and they want to do it and file an application tomorrow. There's no way, it's not possible that they are going to be able to do it within 1 year because they would have to go and get the license. This step is the first step in multiple steps. So there's literally no way that someone would make it for this grow season anyway. So we might as well take the whole time and do it right and go through the, the detailed process. So I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter because we're still gonna, no one's gonna be growing anything this year, and it's impossible to get a license that fast unless your, friend is giving out the license.
To be clear, Ryan, nobody bringing a cultivator license application forward would be approved regardless. It's not an allowable use.
Yeah, it's not an allowable use, right? I understand.
Okay.
I guess, yeah, all right, fine. Just put it in the moratorium is what I'm saying, because
Okay.
like Ray said, it doesn't really matter. It's just an and. It's just including it with. It's not going to change any actions. So
Okay.
that's my point.
Okay.
And I do still think that farms long term should be able to do it because they're not going to have all the issues that everyone else did.
Alvin, did you have a question? Alvin?
Yeah, can we go on, please?
Right, okay, so Mr. Canori's vote is for
Within
Amber-
scope.
within the scope. Mr. Blackmer?
It doesn't really matter to me. I'll go along with Ryan if you're looking for a count.
Mr. Hill?
Yes, let's move on.
Within the
do you-
scope.
Within the scope or as a footnote?
If anything, I like Tira's suggestion, it's a footnote only.
Footnote, thank you. Ms. Celsi?
I'm gonna say, just so that it is clarified to the public in the scope.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Williams?
In the scope.
Thank you. Mr. Lanky?
Footnote.
Mr. Krogel,
Footnote,
Mr. Santos,
Footnote.
and I have a vote for footnote, so that's 5 for footnote, 4 for within the scope, so we will go the footnote route.
You guys are like the Supreme Court tonight.
This is why they pay us the big bucks, Tira.
Is that it?
Yeah.
To include cultivator as a footnote to the more. Yeah, okay. All right, so now, ladies and germs, the reason we all came here tonight, lighting standards for development. Oh, how did that happen? Got weird in this outline. So what you see before you is the revisions that I made, which for some reason are not showing up in red line, allowing for residential dark skies standards instead of just commercial, large multifamily and mixed use development. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, I got a couple questions here.
Mhm.
The first thing is a statement. You know, I've been going to these seminars, and all the seminars, the two of them asked, well, a gentleman at one and a woman at another one said, when you're bringing new stuff up as regulations, you should get out and talk to the public about what's good, what the regulations are and how they feel about them. And now I got a question: how many commissioners have been out in the public asking about this dark sky stuff? Because I know I have, and the people of this town do not want anything to do with these dark skies. And I think there's going to be a lot of people at this meeting when these regulations go to be put in.
Ray,
And
I've also
Just
heard
for
similar.
my own before you go, Ryan, but just for my own clarification, Ray, are you talking just about the residential standards, or are you talking about the previously suggested commercial, mixed use, yada, yada standards?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them, because I've been talking to people also.
Okay. I will tell you this, I don't have a huge dog in this fight. It was suggested as a template earlier in the year, as you know, which I shared with you. I have two observations. I do not care which way you go, but I have two observations in favor of them. One is, as we know, Last Green Valley is the heritage corridor in which we are located, and a part of their appeal, the thing they promote is that the northeast corner of Connecticut is one of the last dark skies corridors in the country, right? So obviously they would be highly in favor of this. In a more general term, I hear a lot of oxygen expended on how much the members of this community want it to stay rural, want to preserve their conservation. But every time something is brought up in this commission that would have an actual affirmative effect on preserving the natural environment, the ability to preserve green space, this is the kind of response that we get. Now, I don't really care, right? We can strike this whole thing. It just means fewer changes go in. But the only reason I included it at all is because the input that I get from members of this community is that they value the less spoiled landscapes of Northeast Connecticut. So that is my only statement I'm going to make on these things, and I'm happy to hear you guys discuss it otherwise.
Can I say something?
I see Jane, Brian, and then Joe. Sorry, I was typing and looking away.
Okay. The people that I have talked to do not want to be regulated to a degree where they are told when they can put their lights on, when they have to turn them off, when they can put up their Christmas decorations, how bright. The one thing is, obviously you don't want a floodlight. But their concern was that it is going to go into their own private lives as far as what they do for lighting. And they're dead set against it. It's too restrictive, being told what you can put on, when you can put on it, and when it's going to go out. And that's what I've heard from a lot of people.
To that end, Jane, that is exactly why when I first suggested this, I limited it intentionally to commercial properties, large multifamilies, and mixed-use developments. The only reason we're just, and we came to a reasonable consensus after that, as I recall. The only reason we're going back in here is because we had members of the public, residents in Thompson, who raised this as an issue to the CEO and to me. And so in good faith, just like I did with Mr. Poitras and with Rainey, we included it as a suggestion. We just haven't been able to discuss it until this meeting.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand that. There were one or two people that complained about a neighbor that had a bright light shining on them. Their concerns were that their rights were going to be stepped on. And as far as lighting goes, I understand big businesses and complexes and things like that. But once you put it into play, it literally has opened up the door so that their restrictions are going to get stronger.
Thank you, Jane. Brian?
I'm just trying to understand what we're even talking about here. What is the problem with the way our regulations are written right now? Has anyone said something specific about the way this is written?
There
just hear that people
there
are
are
complaining
no
about it.
lighting standards currently in your regulations, except for some very limited stuff in.
Because I remember talking about the lighting on buildings and like you
Yeah.
said, businesses and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's
we
very
did.
limited, and it does primarily relate to parking areas and businesses. Yes.
And that's where we should leave it.
Okay, all right, I guess I'm done. I have not read this section, so that's my own fault, but I guess that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Ray and then Alvin.
I think we ought to leave the lighting the way it was put in there in 2020. Two people come in and complain about lights. Instead of going over and talking to their neighbor and ask them to turn the light, they come in and expect you to put a regulation on, what's it, 9,300. So you're going to put regulations on 9,298 people because of two people. People should get off their phones, get off their computers, and go knock on their neighbor's door and say, "Hey, please, can you change the light? Can you turn that light down?" There's no communication with people anymore, and most of it's because of these damn computers. And I think we ought to leave well enough alone what was put in 2020. That's my opinion.
Okay, Alvin?
Yeah, good portion of lighting standards now is really not only in commercial, but also in residential, is in the building code, the state building code. But again, that's on new construction. It doesn't go backwards.
To what point, Mr. Hill, on the new standards in the building construction for the lighting? Or what do you mean by,
Well,
what does it mean by the lighting under the new construction? They can leave a light on, and on the front of the yard, a little one light that only covers maybe 20 feet.
yeah, it's all in there, but basically it's lumens. It's the intensity and the type of lighting. Fluorescent lighting is no longer allowed.
Oh, I gotta take mine down off the top of my garage?
No,
It's
no, not at all.
It's not retroactive, Jake.
I know.
Not-
I just was just being a little facetious on that, because that was been on the house, but the only time that comes on is at night when I got people over here, and I don't want them to be tripping, going out the door or something like that out in the driveway, or they leave the driveway very carefully. And then it goes off. If it's on for a couple hours, 3 hours, that I get that, but these people are complaining that it's been on all night or for whatever reason, like Ray says, well, get off the computer and go over and knock on a door or something.
Ray, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I got another point to bring up about this. We got families that got elderly people in their houses,
Yep.
And people with dementia that are going outside at night. You need lights on to find the person when they're outside. You got your light turning on. Suppose they're not where the light is and they're around. You got to be able to. It's a safety issue. Every night there's cars being stolen. There's catalytic converters being stolen. Channel 3 News, I don't know how many times I hear it in the mornings. They're saying, leave your lights on at night to protect your property and your possessions. And it's just to put something like this in, we're messing with people's safety of their property and their well-being.
Thanks, Ray.
You're
Ryan, then Jane.
Ray.
I'm just, doing some searches here. From what I've seen online here, there isn't a single statewide guideline specifically for residential exterior lighting. So I don't see why we would want to create one, though
Brian, just to give you a little context, this is the template that was circulated and suggested for users across the state. I mean, it's modified. I pared it way down. So
Okay.
this would be novel in any community that adopt, or
I
maybe
see.
not any community, but in most communities that would be adopting it.
Okay. I'm just gonna go on mute then. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, I agree with what Ray said. I have a daughter that has had her car broken into 3 times, and they keep their lights on now. And they are on the other half out in Litchfield County, and the safety reasons, everything else. My opinion is we do not need to do this.
Okay, does anybody else have any other thoughts on this topic before we do some kind of voice poll on it?
I guess I agree with what Jane and Ray and even what Brian said too, to most extent, but I'm a little conflicted in my mind. I just want to say it, that we're talking about the last Green Valley and the values where I clearly support. And every time I bring up something, it's about protecting farms and open space and land. But on the other side, you're bringing that up, but then you're talking about, developing all over the town. So wouldn't that by definition create more light? And, that would be a big problem. So I guess I just don't think that using the last Green Valley as a shield for this is really a good argument. If at the same time you want to, talk about developing everywhere in town and creating,
More lights.
environment, it doesn't make sense to me in my mind. I can't balance those two things.
So again, just for clarification, nobody in any conversation, any member of this commission or staff is in favor of unrestricted development all over town.
Okay.
That is not what anybody has ever proposed. I'm not suggesting that the last Green Valley is a shield. I'm telling you that they advocate for this specific type of regulation. That is a fact. They are highly in favor of communities adopting dark skies regulations as a part of their mission to preserve the dark skies of the National Heritage Corridor. That is a fact. As I said at the beginning, you can adopt them, you cannot adopt them. It is entirely up to you, but I have presented them in 2 different forms for your consideration. One, which was all related to commercial, multifamily, and mixed-use developments, and one which, based on the feedback from certain members of the public, included residential standards. You can adopt either, you can adopt none. It is entirely up to this commission. I'm just presenting you with options. Go ahead, Jane.
I understand what you're saying about the last Green Valley, but, and I understand all the regs that come down, not only from the state, but also from the federal government. But as far as I'm concerned, this is unnecessary. It is something that literally goes into somebody's private life, safety, everything else is considered. It is not needed. I too love this area and the open spaces and all of it. But I also have to take into consideration the safety of people and everything else that goes along with it. And when we start taking away those rights from those individuals, we're making a mistake.
Thank you, Jane. Alvin?
Yes, let's just keep it with commercial.
Agreed.
Yep.
So when you say keep it with commercial, as currently construed from the 2020 update or the prior draft, which had more stringent and specific language for commercial properties?
Yes, the more stringent,
The
Tila.
prior draft here. Okay, Joe, we're gonna need.
Correct.
Yeah,
a poll
absolutely.
here.
That's what I was about to jump in on. Yeah, I mean, so my sense is that there's no one here strongly advocating for including this residential piece. So
We can take that off the table.
yeah, so your two options will be, you know, the current regulations from the 2020 version or the 2024 draft, including commercial. Does that make sense to people?
Including only commercial.
Including only commercial, yeah. Thank you. Okay, for kicks, I'm gonna go backwards this time because poor Ryan's been on the hot seat twice already. So, Mr. Santos, we'll start with you.
Only commercial. Do I have to say 2024?
Yeah,
As is or the draft?
Yeah.
so the draft, Brian.
Yeah, draft commercial.
Great, thank you. Mike.
Regulations, 2020.
2020 regulations. Mr. Lanky.
Draft. And
Ray.
4.
2020 regulations.
Jane.
Sorry, 2020 regulations.
All right, thank you. Alvin.
Yes, I want the 24 regulations, commercial.
Randy.
24 regulations, commercial.
Brian.
24.
And I'm for the 2024 draft as well. So we moved to a 6-3 on that one. We shifted a little bit.
Okay.
But thank you, everyone. And thank you for, you know, that good discussion on that. I think it is important. And
Okay.
Sarah, while you're typing, or it seems like you're done typing, that was it, right? That was the last item?
That is the last item in the draft, unless I'm mistaken. Let me just keep scrolling down here. Yeah, that should have been it, because that was a novel section, so it was new. So then the last thing on the agenda, I believe, let me save this and then stop share. Save. So the last thing on the agenda was just to again discuss, just as a refresher, and this might even be new to a couple of the commissioners, the process then going forward. What are you doing, Santos? The process going forward. So I will go back in this rolling draft, finalize it, highlight in bold all changes where you've agreed to consensus thus far. That will be the document that goes before you to be accepted for public hearing. To be accepted at the January regular meeting for public hearing at the February regular meeting. Once you accept that, I will publish that as what we've called the locked draft, meaning I'm going to put it up on the website and, you know, as a news story on the webpage and blah, 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 all those things, to encourage members of the public to provide feedback on this final form, call it the penultimate form of the draft. No changes will be made to the draft while it is public in that way. But I will accrue all of the comments from the public or additional comments from commissioners in the public hearing. I will share all of the comments that I receive. Just read them word for word as received. If based on any of those comments, I have additional suggestions for exact language suggestions for the commission to consider during the public hearing, they may make those kinds of changes. Any changes that occur once you go to the vote for the up or down approval have to be exact language. It can't be go back and work on this. It's this regulation says we want green front doors, but we're going to change it to say we want red front doors. It has to be exact. And then you will discuss at public hearing and presumably vote up or down at that time. Is that clear for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, I think it might be Ryan's first time going through one of the updates. I think everybody else has been through one of the updates, so that was mostly for his benefit.
Thanks.
Any questions? Well,
Nope.
if there's no questions, you guys can get like 18 minutes of your life back.
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, motion made and seconded to adjourn. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned at 8:43 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, and
Right.
just one more thing before everybody hangs up. Usually I turn these drafts around the next day. I have a MISRAC meeting in the morning and I also do the minutes for that. So it's possible, maybe even probable you won't see this until Monday, just if anybody's looking for it.
Well, we'll even give you Tuesday.
Oh, thanks, JBL.
But after that, you're in trouble, Tara.
I just want to say thank you, not just for tonight, but for this entire process. Every time we go through it, I really do think there's value in it. So I want to thank everyone.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night,
Have a
everyone.
great
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.
Good night.